This is a monarch butterfly. You've probably seen one before. Monarchs are some of the most recognizable and charismatic insects in North America. Adult monarch butterflies are large, brightly colored, and undeniably beautiful. What's more, they have a huge migratory range spanning 3 countries, making monarchs known and beloved internationally. However, the unique life cycle and migration route that make monarchs so special also leaves the species incredibly vulnerable to the risk of extinction. Often a candidate for the U.S. endangered species list, monarch numbers have dwindled drastically in their overwintering sites over the last 50 years or so. Application of herbicides that kill off milkweeds that monarchs rely on and habitat destruction are among the causes for the monarch's decline. Furthermore, with a yearly migration of over 3,000 kilometers that relies on many fragile and specific variables, climate change is anticipated to be catastrophic. This video will discuss threats to monarchs in the U.S. as well as research into mitigating those threats. We will also take a deep dive into the debate about tropical milkweed, including our research at the Oklahoma Biological Survey, to better understand the effect, if any, that tropical milkweed can have on migrating monarchs. We will end the video with resources and information about how anyone can become involved with monarch conservation. Before we begin, let's clarify the legal status of monarch conservation in the U.S. Currently, in the fall of 2022, the monarch butterfly is not on the U.S. endangered species list, but monarchs did make the news in July of 2022 when they were added to the IUCN Red List. The IUCN is the International Union for Conservation of Nature, and it is a resource meant to provide research and policy recommendations for biodiversity conservation globally. The IUCN listing, while significant, has no legal ramification for conservation action in the U.S. You can pause here to read the brief outline of the difference between the IUCN and the Endangered Species Act. To be able to better understand the threats to monarchs, it helps to know the monarch life cycle. It all begins with an egg, or maybe more accurately, a plant. An adult monarch will only lay her eggs on a milkweed plant. Milkweeds are a genus of plant with the scientific name Asclepias. They are so named for a milky latex liquid that oozes out of the plant when broken. Not all milkweeds will exude this milky latex, but many will. Other clues that you're looking at a milkweed species are irregular flowers, opposite leaves, which just means that 2 leaves come out of the stem at the same place or node, and large oblong seed pods that crack open and are wind dispersed. Milkweeds come in lots of different shapes, sizes, and species depending on what region you find yourself in. And there's more than 20 species native to Oklahoma. Milkweeds are what's called a host plant for monarchs, which means that when eggs hatch, the only thing that the monarch caterpillars can or will eat is milkweed. Monarchs are adapted to digest milkweed, which is toxic to many other animals. In fact, the bright orange, black, and white colors of the adult wings are a signal to predators that monarch butterflies are poisonous because they carry the same toxins found in the milkweed plant and ingested by very hungry monarch caterpillars. Back to monarch eggs, you can see here that they are actually about the size of a ballpoint pen tip. The length of the egg stage from ovipositing to hatching is about 5 days. The length of the caterpillar or larval stage is about 2 weeks, during which time the larva eats as much milkweed as it can and grows as much as possible. When a monarch larva is at the end of its 5th growth stage, it will travel away from its milkweed host plant and find a suitable place for the pupa stage. The larva hangs upside down in a J shape, spinning a web-like silky substance to anchor its back feet. The larva's outer skin becomes transformed into the shell of a pupa, or a chrysalis, which is bright green and highly uniform between individuals. As the pupa ages, it'll become darker, and you'll be able to eventually recognize the wing pattern of the adult developing inside. After about 10 days, the adult will close or emerge from the pupa. It will dry and stretch its wings and then take off. When adults emerge from the pupa, they have bright colored wings that are orange, black, and white. You can tell which butterflies are male by the presence of 2 black dots on their hind wing. The females do not have these 2 dots. The adults have a straw-like tongue called a proboscis that they use to feed on nectar from any flowering plant, including milkweed. The monarch life cycle can also include a migration as an adult butterfly. In the U.S., there are generally 2 main populations of monarchs separated geographically by the Rocky Mountains. The monarchs in Oklahoma are a part of the eastern population. Towards the end of the summer, adult monarchs born in the breeding grounds of the northern U.S. and Canada will begin to fly southward towards their overwintering site in Michoacan, Mexico. The entire eastern population of monarchs will funnel through the Midwest into less than 20 hectares of forest roosts in central Mexico by the beginning of December. Sometime around March, these same monarchs will leave their roosting trees and start traveling back to the northern breeding grounds. On their way to and from Mexico, they may or may not reproduce and lay eggs in the Midwest if the conditions are right. Any eggs in Oklahoma are laid by monarchs on their way north or south. Once returned to the breeding grounds, the migratory monarchs will produce about 3 generations of non-migratory individuals before a new generation of migratory monarchs is once again born and ready to travel next August. The migratory monarchs are physically different from other generations. They are typically larger and much more hardy, which helps with their 2-way trip. They are sometimes called Methuselah monarchs or the super generation because they live far longer than other generations. Since monarchs have such a particular life cycle that relies on a lot of specific variables, they face a lot of threats. Let's start with habitat loss. Degradation of native flowering plant habitat throughout the American Midwest means a loss of nectaring plants which feed monarchs on their epic journey north and south. The native flowering prairies of the Midwestern United States have been transformed by human development. Additionally, milkweed populations have drastically declined in the Midwest due to targeted herbicides on agricultural land. Again, caterpillars rely solely on milkweed for food and shelter, and milkweed provides a key source of nectar for migrating adults. So a loss of milkweed habitat is also a loss of monarch population. Let's talk about I-35. The main eastern monarch migration corridor follows roughly the same route as Interstate 35. On a highway with speed limits of 75 miles an hour, a monarch butterfly doesn't always stand a chance. Additionally, lots of milkweeds and other wildflowers grow along the right-of-ways. Therefore, studying the way Interstate 35 and its right-of-ways interact with the migrating monarch population has become a priority for the Oklahoma Department of Transportation, or ODOT, and scientists at Oklahoma State University. Milkweeds are actually denser on right-of-ways than adjacent lands because right-of-ways are not being treated and managed with herbicides the same way that agricultural fields are. So figuring out how to optimize this space that sits precariously on the edge of a multi-lane high-speed roadway would be huge for monarch conservation. Scientists at OSU are researching the best management regimes for roadsides to produce the most milkweed during the times that monarchs are passing through Oklahoma. Based on this research, in 2016, ODOT changed their roadside mowing regime to postpone spring mowing to July. Lastly, climate change. We don't actually know what triggers monarchs to migrate. If it's something phenological like temperature or weather that's causing the migration, then climate change will throw the timing off. If the trigger is something like hours of daylight, solar angle, or anything else related to the position of the Earth and Sun, then climate change will still throw the timing of the migration off. We know that climate change is affecting seasons, rain patterns, first freezes, storm variability and veracity. These effects could all disrupt migration. For example, even if a monarch leaves the northern breeding grounds at a historically accurate time, intensifying weather events could cause milkweed to bloom and die back way too early in the season for migrating monarchs to take advantage of it. Luckily, conservationists are doing things to protect monarchs like planting more milkweed. But is it just as simple as more milkweed equals more monarchs? Ecology is fragile, and sometimes what humans do to restore ecological systems can have unintended consequences that further disrupt that system instead. This is tropical milkweed, or by its scientific name, Asclepias cervica. There is a lot of research, discussion, and debate in the monarch conservation community about whether or not tropical milkweed is another tool in the arsenal to fight for monarchs, or whether it's contrary to the cause. For some background, tropical milkweed is a non-native milkweed commonly sold in garden centers throughout America because it is easy to grow and highly attractive. Monarch butterflies migrating through the Midwest do nectar on tropical milkweed flowers and do lay eggs on tropical milkweed plants. For this reason, many people working in monarch conservation have embraced tropical milkweed planting in the U.S. as another way to help the monarchs, especially because it's so easy to grow. However, there is a growing body of evidence suggesting that tropical milkweed might not be a cure-all. Before we dive in, let's get some terminology straight. These are the definitions for native, non-native, and invasive species. In Oklahoma, we would consider tropical milkweed to be a non-native, non-invasive, because Oklahoma is not a part of tropical milkweed's native range, but tropical milkweed is not spreading on its own in Oklahoma. Tropical milkweed does not survive over winter in Oklahoma, so tropical milkweed plants found here are a result of people planting them. If you'd like, take a second to pause here and get familiar with these terms. Let's go through some of the reasons why scientists are becoming concerned about tropical milkweed. Accumulation of toxins. Some research suggests that tropical milkweed produces elevated levels of toxins, especially in warmer climates. It's suggested that in warmer climates of the southern U.S., higher concentrations of toxins than caterpillars are meant to digest, and milkweed could be fatal for monarch larvae. This is more of a concern in geographies where tropical milkweed stays green and lush year-round, which does not happen in Oklahoma. Ophryocistis electroscura, or commonly OE, is a parasitic protozoa that infects monarch butterflies. According to the Xerces Society, adult monarchs transport the protozoa to milkweeds where caterpillars can then ingest the OE. Elevated levels of OE in monarch bodies is correlated with less successful migrations, lower body mass, shorter lifespan, and lower reproductive potential, as well as impaired flight. Importantly, OE dies when the milkweed plant it's on dies back or senesces in the late summer or fall. But tropical milkweed stays green and lush much longer than native milkweeds do. Therefore, tropical milkweed that dies back later into the season accumulates more OE than native species of milkweed do. So adult monarchs and caterpillars interacting with tropical milkweed later into the season are exposed to higher levels of OE than they would be on native milkweeds. OE can be spotted on adult monarchs by taking a swab of wing cells and reviewing them under a microscope. Infected individuals can also be spotted when the normally green pupae turn black-tinged and when adults have difficulty eclosing or emerging from their chrysalis and may appear with deformed wings. Lastly, delayed senescence. Even in places like Oklahoma, where tropical milkweed cannot survive through the winter, it's present and lush a lot later into the fall season than native milkweeds are. As temperatures cool and days shorten, migrating monarchs go into a physical state called reproductive diapause, which means they pause their reproductive activity during the journey. However, there is a concern that the availability of tropical milkweed late into the season triggers monarchs to drop out of diapause and to lay eggs that they would not have otherwise. A hypothesized consequence of this in Oklahoma is that eggs laid later into the season on tropical milkweed may not have a chance to mature into adults before the first freeze, so that they can continue the migration. This query of delayed senescence is what we are studying at the Oklahoma Biological Survey. For the last few years, we've been providing both native and tropical milkweed to wild migrating monarchs in the fall to see if the availability of tropical milkweed late into the season is truly linked to adult monarchs laying their eggs too late to be viable. Let's take you through the study. In 2018, the study area was designed and assembled by Dr. Priscilla Crawford and her students at the Aquatics Research Facility at the University of Oklahoma, or as we call it, ARF. Out at ARF, there are 18 round beds that are each about a meter in diameter. In each of the 18 beds, milkweed is planted along the circumference and nectar plants are planted in the middle. The nectarine plants are flowering and chosen to attract pollinators, including the adult monarchs. The nectar plants also provide a good location for monarch caterpillars to make their chrysalises. The milkweed in each bed is either non-native tropical milkweed or a common species including showy milkweed, green antelope horn milkweed, and butterfly weed. Each bed is assigned a letter, and each milkweed plant is marked by a number. The native milkweeds and most of the nectarine plants are perennial, so they come back each year. The tropical milkweed and any plant that dies is replaced annually. Year-round, we maintain the milkweed in the beds by weeding and watering. When the migration comes through from Mexico northward during the spring, and again southward during the late summer and fall, we're out there every 2 days checking every leaf and every stalk of milkweed for all stages of monarch life. We record every monarch egg, larva, and pupa, as well as data about the plant they're on, like plant species, quality, height, and more. After a few years, we hope our data can answer questions about the correlation between female monarchs laying eggs late into the season and the presence of tropical milkweed, as well as the survival of individuals laid late into the season and adult preference for tropical milkweed. Additionally, this past summer we introduced a new treatment to the study that simulates a mowing regime on half of the plants of each species. By mimicking the mowing recommendations from research out of OSU, we wanted to see if our mowed native milkweeds would last longer into the fall season. That did not happen this year, but we will need a few more years of data to be sure. Lastly, with some additional beds added last fall, we conducted an experiment to test whether or not tropical milkweed seeds dispersed from cultivated plants would be able to survive the winter and establish on their own. That no tropical milkweed seeds grew while the native green antelope horn milkweed did indicates that tropical milkweed is not a threat for becoming invasive in central Oklahoma right now. With the COVID pandemic limiting data collection in 2020, it's still too early in the study to answer our questions about tropical milkweed, reproductive diapause, and eggs being laid too late in the season to survive. What we can say, though, is that every migration that's come through the research beds in Norman, Oklahoma has been really, really different. We've had springs with caterpillars, springs without caterpillars. We've had summers where some adult butterflies seem to hang out in Oklahoma. We've had fall migrations pass through Oklahoma really early, and this year we had eggs laid and hatched well into the last week of October, which, for reference, is pretty late. So one thing we can say for sure is that monarch migration varies a lot from year to year. Regional weather events can push the entire migration right through a state or two in a couple of days. Or an early freeze can take out all of the milkweed that would have lasted for weeks or more otherwise. What I'm getting at here is that monarch migration is highly affected both by climate and by weather, which makes it all the more important for us humans to make sure that monarchs have the best chance possible. That means that we really need to work on all of the harms laid out at the beginning of the video, like habitat destruction, loss of milkweed, and climate change. And speaking of milkweed, another thing we can say for sure is that milkweeds are important for a lot more than just monarchs. You don't have to hang out at the ARF beds for too long to notice all kinds of life out there, no matter the season. The closer you look, the more you will notice. There's so many different kinds of bees, butterflies, moths, spiders, beetles, and so much more. There's a whole food web contained on these milkweed and nectarine plants. And milkweeds are host plants to much more than just monarchs, like this queen butterfly. Spending so much time out here, you fall in love with the chunky little monarch caterpillars, but it's also impossible not to be charmed by all of the other residents as well. The explosion of life out here gives you a glimpse of what it could look like if we had more native vegetation available in our towns and cities. All this to say, when you protect monarchs, milkweeds, and their habitat, you protect so much more. So what can you do? There's a spectrum of ways you can be a part of monarch conservation, and there are organizations and resources that can accompany you. The question is, what do you have that you'd like to offer? Let's start with space. Here in Oklahoma, we're a stopping point on the migration to and from the northern breeding grounds. We will typically see adult monarchs traveling south from August to October and north from March to May. There can be caterpillars at both times if the conditions are right. So in Oklahoma, it's really important that there are nectar flowers for food and milkweeds to lay eggs on. Whether you're working with a suburban lawn, apartment balcony, or an extensive rangeland, if you have outdoor space and some time available, you could plant things that are really good for monarchs. If you have space here in Oklahoma, we want to recommend Okies for Monarchs. Through the Okies website, you can access information about what to plant based on where you live, and you can get connected with Oklahoma monarch experts to advise you. If you have time that you'd like to offer, we recommend taking part in community science projects that track monarch migration and milkweed phenology. iNaturalist is an app on your phone where you can upload photos of animals and plants as well as their geolocation. Researchers can, and increasingly do, access these datasets of observations to track phenology and movement of species. For something a little bit more involved and routine, you could try Journey North or Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. Through the Journey North website, you can enter monarch sightings at all life stages. Through the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, you monitor a patch of milkweed semi-weekly for number and size of larvae you find there. Lastly, you can participate in tagging with Monarch Watch. In late summer and fall, you can volunteer by yourself or with a group to catch and tag adult butterflies as they migrate southward. When tagging, volunteers attach a small 9mm adhesive sticker to the hind wing of a butterfly. About 1% of tags are found in Mexico at the overwintering grounds and reported back to Monarch Watch. Since monarchs can't exactly wear a GPS tracking collar like a wolf or a deer, tagging is the best way to monitor the movement of individuals and populations. Last but not least is money. If you'd like to donate to monarch conservation, you should check out Monarch Joint Venture. Monarch Joint Venture is the coalition of most independent monarch, butterfly, and other pollinator organizations in the migratory monarch range. On their website, you can review a list of monarch projects and organizations to find one that you would most like to contribute to. Thank you so much for watching and listening to this presentation. For more information about the Oklahoma Biological Survey and the research going on there into monarchs and many other things, please check out our brand new website at www.ou.edu/biosurvey.